In the small town of Abangan, situated deep in the heart of the Philippines, there was a hospital unlike any other. At the very stroke of midnight, when the moon was at its highest point in the sky, the night shift began. It was during this mysterious time that Nurse Mabel ventured into the dimly lit corridors, where eerie shadows danced along the cracked walls. Nurse Mabel had always been drawn to the night shift, fascinated by the stories whispered among her colleagues. There were tales of ghostly apparitions, strange noises echoing through empty rooms, and unexplainable phenomena that plagued the night staff. Many nurses refused to work during this haunted hour, but not Mabel. She was determined to uncover the truth behind the rumors. As the clock struck 12, Mabel donned her uniform and quietly made her way to the nurses' station. She glanced at the sign-in sheet and noted that she was the only one scheduled for the night shift. "Just me and the ghosts," she chuckled nervously, trying to shake off her growing unease. With a deep breath, Mabel set off on her nightly rounds. The hospital seemed to come alive with an otherworldly energy, as though the walls were breathing and whispering secrets only the dead knew. Each step she took echoed through the empty hallways, sending shivers down her spine. As Mabel passed room 304, an eerie chill washed over her. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, but a strange smell lingered in the air. Mabel dismissed it as a result of her overactive imagination and continued on her way. The further she delved into the hospital's dark recesses, the more her heart pounded in her chest. Her senses heightened, every creak and groan of the building magnified in her mind. But Mabel had a determination unlike any other, and she pressed forward, eager to uncover the truth. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. Mabel's heart dropped and she rushed towards the source of the sound. It led her to the morgue, where rows of cold metal drawers stood ominously. She hesitated for a moment, steeling herself, before opening one. Inside was Dr. Garcia, one of the hospital's esteemed physicians, writhing in anguish. His body was covered in grotesque wounds, and his eyes were wide with terror. "Help me," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Mabel's hands trembled as she reached out to touch him, but before she could make contact, Dr. Garcia's body dissolved into a cloud of black smoke. It swirled around her, suffocating her senses, until it vanished into thin air. Stunned, Mabel stumbled backward and fell against a nearby wall. She could feel the presence of something dark and malevolent in the hospital, its energy pulsating through the very air she breathed. It dawned on her that the stories she had heard were not mere legends, but a chilling reality she was now powerless to escape. Determined to find answers, Mabel continued her exploration, albeit with a newfound wariness. As she ventured deeper into the bowels of the hospital, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. The walls seemed to whisper her name, the floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and shadowy figures flitted in her peripheral vision. With every step she took, Mabel's heart pounded louder. Fear threatened to consume her, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself that she had a duty to fulfill. She was the night shift nurse, and it was her responsibility to face the darkness head-on. As Mabel rounded a particularly dark corridor, she froze in her tracks. A figure stood at the end, bathed in an ethereal glow. It was a young girl, no older than 10, her eyes somber and filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" Mabel asked, her voice trembling. The girl made no reply, but beckoned her to follow. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Mabel obliged, silently trailing behind the child. They arrived at the hospital's chapel, its doors creaking open invitingly. Inside, rows of flickering candles cast ghostly shadows along the pews. Mabel surveyed the room, a mix of trepidation and curiosity coursing through her veins. The girl pointed to a faded portrait hanging on the wall, depicting a group of nurses clad in white attire. "Our sisters," she whispered, her voice hauntingly gentle. "They were trapped here, unable to move on." Mabel gazed at the portrait, her heart sinking at the realization. These were the nurses who had vanished without a trace over the years, leaving behind only whispers and speculation. But why? Why were they unable to move on? Mabel asked, her voice heavy with empathy. The girl turned to face her, her eyes filled with tears. "They were taken by the darkness. Trapped in this hospital, doomed to roam the halls for eternity. They need your help, night shift nurse," the girl replied, her voice quivering. Mabel felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had always believed in the power of compassion, and now she knew she had to use it to set these lost souls free. In the days that followed, Mabel pored over ancient records and pored through dusty files in an attempt to unravel the hospital's dark past. She discovered that the hospital had been built on an ancient burial ground, the resting place of forgotten souls. Legend had it that the hospital's founder, a corrupt physician, had performed unspeakable acts in the pursuit of immortality. His wicked deeds had tainted the very foundation of the building, trapping innocent lives in its grasp. Armed with this knowledge, Mabel devised a plan. With the help of a local priest, she performed a cleansing ritual in the chapel, sending prayers and chants echoing through the empty halls. She believed that by purging the hospital of its darkness, she could release the trapped souls. The night of the ritual arrived, and Mabel, adorned in protective amulets and carrying a cross, made her way to the chapel. As the clock struck midnight, she began to recite the ancient chants, her voice resolute and unwavering. The hospital trembled as the energy shifted, as though the very walls were resisting expulsion. Mabel persisted, her heart filled with hope and conviction. The presence of the lost nurses gathered around her, lending their strength to her cause. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the hospital's core, bathing Mabel and the chapel in a warm, golden glow. The darkness that had plagued the hospital for decades dissipated, leaving behind newfound peace. Mabel, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed to her knees. The nurses' apparitions faded, but not before they smiled at her, their faces filled with gratitude. She had set them free. The next morning, as the sun rose over the hospital, Mabel found herself surrounded by her colleagues and superiors. Word had spread about the events of the previous night, and they all looked at her with awe and respect. "You've done the impossible, Mabel," the hospital's administrator said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've lifted the curse that's haunted this place for so long." Mabel smiled, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. She had not only faced her fears head-on but had also brought peace to the restless spirits that had haunted the hospital for years. For her, that was the greatest reward. From that day forward, ghostly murmurs and eerie happenings became a thing of the past. Mabel's bravery had rewritten the hospital's story, transforming it into a place of healing and tranquility. As the years went by, Mabel became a legend within the hospital's halls. Nurses would regale new staff members with tales of her bravery, inspiring them to face any challenges that came their way. Mabel continued her work as the night shift nurse, but now the nights held nothing but tranquility. The hospital exhaled relief, basking in the restoration of its soul. Each patient who walked through the doors felt a sense of comfort, unaware of the darkness that had once plagued the building. Mabel's story became a ghost story of a different kind, one of courage and triumph over evil. She became an inspiration to nurses everywhere, reminding them that sometimes the scariest things in life are the ones that can be overcome. One particularly chilly night, as Mabel walked the halls, a young nurse pulled her aside. Her eyes were filled with fear, her voice trembled as she spoke. "Nurse Mabel, I heard a rumor," the young nurse said, glancing around nervously. "They say that a ghostly figure haunts the basement now. Do you think it's true?" Mabel smiled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. She leaned in closer, her voice filled with a mischievous undertone as she whispered, "Oh, my dear, you have no idea what I can do with a bedsheet and some glow-in-the-dark paint." The young nurse's eyes widened in surprise, then broke into a fit of giggles. The ghost stories that once haunted the hospital had become nothing more than a joke, a reminder of the darkness that Mabel had vanquished. And so, life carried on in the hospital of Abangan. Nurses worked their shifts, patients received care, and Mabel stood as a beacon of light amidst the shadows. The night shift had been forever changed by her bravery. As the years passed, Mabel entered retirement. Her legend remained a staple of the hospital's lore, promising young nurses that even the darkest of nights could be conquered with determination and a little bit of humor. On her final night in the hospital, the nurses gathered to bid her farewell. They showered her with gratitude, her presence having forever altered the course of their lives. "Thank you, Mabel," one of the nurses said, her eyes filled with tears. "Because of you, we have the courage to face the unknown." Mabel smiled, her heart filled with warmth. She had come to the Philippines seeking adventure and a sense of purpose, and she had found it in the darkest corners of the night. The night shift nurse had become a legend, her story passed down through generations of hospital staff. Her name would forever be etched in the hospital's history, forever intertwined with tales of courage, compassion, and the conquering of fear. And so, as Nurse Mabel walked out of the hospital's doors for the last time, she knew that her legacy would live on. The night shift nurse had triumphed over darkness, reminding the world to never underestimate the power of one person's pursuit of truth and unyielding bravery.